Ambassador Jian Kim pressed his face against the cold metal of the observation window. The stars stretched endlessly around their ship, but ahead of them grew something that made his breath catch. Nexus Prime Station hung in space like a glittering city, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Lights twinkled across its surface like tiny stars, and ships from 100 different worlds docked at its many ports. "Sir, we'll be docking in 20 minutes," called out Lieutenant Miho from a navigation console. His voice carried a nervous edge that Jian understood completely. Today would change everything for humanity. Jian turned to face his small crew. Dr. Minji Park sat at a table, carefully arranging their gifts for the alien representatives. She handled each item like it was made of glass, recordings of Earth's most beautiful music, paintings of golden sunsets over peaceful meadows, and pressed flowers from their homeworld gardens. Everything had been chosen to show humanity's gentle side. "Remember, everyone," Jian said softly, "today we represent our entire species. Every word we speak, every gesture we make, will shape how the galaxy sees us forever. Let's show them who we really are." Captain Sujin Lee nodded from where she stood, checking her dress uniform one final time. She had removed all military decorations, except for a small piece to pin on her collar. Her sidearm was locked away in the ship's armory. Today, she was not a soldier, but an ambassador of peace. The docking process felt like it took forever. Through the airlock window, Jian could see alien beings moving about the station. Some walked on two legs like humans, others floated through the air, and still others seemed to glide along the walls. His heart pounded as the airlock sealed and pressurized. The doors opened with a soft hiss. The welcoming committee that greeted them was unlike anything from Earth's wildest dreams. Crystalline beings that looked like living diamonds hummed in perfect harmony, their voices creating music that made the air itself seem to dance. Tall, graceful creatures with skin that shifted through every color of the rainbow painted the air around them with welcoming patterns of gold and blue. At the center of the group stood Elder Kethvar. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, draped in flowing robes that seemed to be made of captured starlight. His face was ancient and kind, with large eyes that held wisdom from centuries of life. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the elder said in perfect English, his voice warm like summer rain. "Your reputation for kindness precedes you. We have heard tales of your species' gentle nature from our scouts." Jian felt a moment of surprise. Scouts? When had aliens been watching Earth? But he pushed the thought aside and stepped forward with his warmest smile. "Elder Kethvar, we are deeply honored to be here. Our entire species dreams of this moment, the day we could join the community of peaceful worlds and learn from your ancient wisdom." Dr. Minji Park moved forward and bowed respectfully before offering their gifts. "These are small tokens from our world," she said softly. "Music that has brought comfort to billions, art that captures the beauty we see in simple moments, and flowers that grow in our gardens where children play." The elder accepted each gift with reverence, studying the pressed flowers with particular interest. "Such delicate beauty," he murmured. "Your world must be very peaceful to produce such gentle art." As they walked through the station's grand halls, Jian marveled at the diversity of life around them. Beings that looked like walking plants discussed trade agreements with creatures that seemed to be made of liquid metal. Small, furry aliens with 6 arms worked alongside towering giants whose bodies were covered in scales that sparkled like jewels. "How many species belong to the Confederation?" Jian asked. "Over 400 at last count," replied the elder. "We are always eager to welcome new peaceful civilizations. Violence is so rare among our member worlds that we hardly remember what war looks like." Captain Sujin smiled and nodded. "That gives us great hope, Elder. On Earth, we have worked so hard to move beyond our violent past. We believe that every conflict has a diplomatic solution if we just have the patience to find it. Our military exists only for peacekeeping and disaster relief." The elder's eyes brightened with approval. "Such wisdom in such a young species. You will fit well among us." The formal meetings began in a grand chamber where representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered. Jian spoke of humanity's efforts to heal their planet's wounds, how they had saved the great whales from extinction, protected vast forests from destruction, and worked tirelessly to clean their polluted skies and seas. Dr. Minji shared stories of Earth's art and culture, playing recordings of orchestras where hundreds of humans worked together to create beautiful music. She showed paintings of families sharing meals, children playing in gardens, and old couples watching sunsets together. Captain Sujin charmed the warrior species with tales of human peacekeepers who had ended conflicts without firing a shot, of armies that now spent their time building schools and hospitals instead of fighting wars. Violence should always be the last resort, she explained to a gathering of scaled, reptilian beings who looked like they could tear apart battleships with their bare claws. We have learned that understanding and patience can solve almost any problem. The aliens listened with growing amazement. Here was a species that had seemingly evolved beyond the need for violence, that created beauty instead of destruction, that chose cooperation over conquest. By the end of the first day, trade agreements were being discussed and cultural exchange programs planned. 3 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Confederation, and Dr. Hyunwoo Choi couldn't have been happier with his assignment. The research station on Kepler, 442b, was everything he had dreamed of, a place where humans and aliens worked side by side, studying the planet's amazing crystal formations that grew like trees from a rocky ground. The station buzzed with peaceful activity every day. Professor Veltar, a tall blue-skinned being from the Aquiline Federation, had become Hyunwoo's closest friend. The alien scientist had gills on his neck that fluttered when he got excited about a new discovery, and his forearms allowed him to work twice as fast as any human researcher. "Look at this, my friend," Professor Veltar said one morning, his gills fluttering rapidly as he showed Hyunwoo a crystal sample under the microscope. The growth pattern suggests these formations are actually alive in some way. Hyunwoo leaned in to examine the sample. Around them, other scientists from a dozen different species worked quietly at their stations. The crystalline beings hummed softly as they analyzed mineral compositions. Small, furry creatures with 6 arms carefully cataloged specimens. Everyone moved with the calm, methodical pace of academic research. Captain Sujin Lee had been assigned to the station as security chief, though there seemed little need for her services. The most dangerous thing they had encountered in 3 months was a mild electrical storm that had knocked out power for a few hours. "This is the most boring assignment I've ever had," she had joked to Hyunwoo just the day before. "I spend most of my time organizing supply inventories and checking door locks." That morning started like any other. Hyunwoo was in the geology lab, carefully chipping samples from a particularly interesting crystal formation. The morning shift had just begun, and the coffee in the break room was still hot. Professor Veltar was explaining something about molecular structures to a group of young scientists when the first explosion shook the station. The lights flickered and went out for a moment before emergency power kicked in. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the station as alarms shrieked their urgent warning. "What was that?" asked Dr. Yuno, one of the human biologists, her voice tight with worry. Before anyone could answer, more explosions rocked the station. Through the thick windows of the lab, Hyunwoo could see bright flashes of light streaking through space. Plasma bolts. He realized with growing horror. Someone was shooting at them. Professor Veltar's voice came over the communication system, his usual calm replaced by urgent concern. "All personnel to emergency stations. We are under attack by unknown vessels. Take defensive positions and protect all research data. I am sending distress signals to the nearest patrol fleet." The alien scientists immediately began following their emergency procedures. They had all been trained for this possibility. Space pirates sometimes attacked remote research stations, hoping to steal valuable equipment or data they could sell on the black market. The crystalline beings began harmonizing in low, protective tones while they moved their most valuable samples to reinforce storage areas. The furry 6-armed creatures, despite their small size, efficiently barricaded the laboratory entrances with heavy equipment. Professor Veltar organized teams to guard the main computer cores, while others prepared to destroy sensitive research if capture seemed likely. These attacks rarely last long, Professor Veltar explained to the worried humans. "Pirates want easy targets. When they meet resistance and realize help is coming, they usually retreat. We just need to hold out until patrol ships arrive." Hyun-woo helped stack heavy tables against the lab doors, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Through the reinforced windows, he could see at least 6 pirate ships moving through the asteroid field around the station. This was no small raiding party. This looked like a full military assault. Captain Sujin Lee appeared in the command center just as the first pirate ship docked with the station. She moved with a strange calmness that seemed out of place given the chaos around them. Her usual friendly smile was gone, replaced by an expression that made Hyun-woo's stomach clench with unease. She studied the security monitors showing heat signatures of the boarding party moving through the station's outer corridors. At least 20 armed pirates had already entered through the main docking bay, with more ships moving into position. "Professor Veltar," she said quietly, "please make sure all non-human personnel remain in the safe zones. Lock yourselves in, and don't come out no matter what you hear." The aquiline professor looked confused. "Captain Lee, we should coordinate our defenses. My people have experience with pirate attacks. We can work together to dash." "No." The single word came out sharp and cold. Something in Captain Sujin's voice made Professor Veltar's gills flutter with sudden nervousness. It was like hearing a completely different person speak. "Keep everyone inside," she continued, her tone carrying authority that seemed to fill the room. "Lock the blast doors. Don't come out until we give the all clear. But, Captain, there are only 8 humans on this station. The pirates have at least 50 armed fighters. You cannot possibly dash." "We'll handle this," Captain Sujin interrupted. She turned to look directly at Professor Veltar, and the alien scientist took an involuntary step backward. There was something in her eyes that he had never seen before, something cold and predatory that sent chills through his blue-scaled skin. The great assembly hall of the Galactic Council had never been so crowded. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a buzz of worry and fear that seemed to press against the walls. Elder Kedvar stood at the center podium, his ancient face grave as he waited for silence. "Citizens of the Confederation," his voice boomed across the hall, "we face our darkest hour." The chamber fell completely quiet. Even the crystalline beings stopped their constant humming. Long-range sensors had confirmed what we all hoped would never happen again. The Devourer swarm has returned from deep space. They are moving toward the outer rim worlds, and our best calculations show they will reach the core systems within 18 months. The silence shattered instantly. Representatives began shouting, their translators working frantically to convert panic into dozens of different languages. Some delegates stood on their chairs, waving their arms wildly. Others huddled together in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers. Ambassador Jayan Kim sat quietly in the human section, watching the chaos unfold around him. Next to him, Admiral Yunji Park remained perfectly still, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked like she was waiting for something. The Devourer swarm was every civilized being's worst nightmare. 50 years ago, they had emerged from the dark space between galaxies like a plague of living destruction. The creatures looked like giant insects, but they moved with the coordination of a single mind. They existed for only 2 purposes: to eat everything they could find and to make more themselves. When the swarm had attacked the Andorian Sector 5 decades earlier, 17 different worlds had simply disappeared. Not conquered, not occupied, but consumed completely. Every plant, every animal, every scrap of organic matter had been devoured. Even the soil itself had been stripped bare, leaving nothing but lifeless rock floating in space. The worst part was that the creatures learned. Each world they consumed made them smarter, more organized, more dangerous. By the time the combined fleets of 12 major civilizations had finally driven them back into deep space, the swarm had grown from a few million creatures to over 1 billion. "We must evacuate the rim worlds immediately," shouted General Thakmore of the warrior clans, his scarred hide reflecting the emergency lights. "Pull back to defensive positions around the core systems. Evacuation will only delay the inevitable," called out Counselor Zix from the Tech Republics. "We need to calculate which worlds we can sacrifice to buy time for the others." Professor Veltar, still recovering from his experience at the research station, stood shakily. His gills fluttered with distress as he spoke. Surely there must be some way to communicate with them? Every species can be reasoned with if we find the right approach. The arguments grew louder and more desperate. Some wanted to run. Others wanted to fight. A few suggested trying to hide entire solar systems behind artificial barriers. But everyone knew the truth. When the swarm had been defeated before, it had taken a combined might of hundreds of civilizations and cost billions of lives. Even then, victory had been barely possible. Ambassador Giant Kim stood up slowly. Something about his movement made the chaos in the chamber begin to quiet. He looked different somehow, smaller than before, but also more focused. The apologetic smile that had charmed everyone during first contact was nowhere to be seen. "Honored elders," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the huge chamber. "Humanity volunteers to address this threat." The remaining conversations died away completely. Elder Kevvar leaned forward on the podium, his ancient eyes showing concern. "Ambassador Kim, while we deeply appreciate your species' courage, you must understand the magnitude of what we face. The Devourer swarm has destroyed civilizations far more advanced and powerful than humanity. This is not a problem that can be solved with diplomacy or good intentions." Admiral Yunji Park rose from her seat and stepped forward. She moved with the same calm confidence that Captain Sujin had shown at the research station, but there was something else in her manner now. Something that made even the massive warrior clan representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Elder Kethvar," she said politely, "perhaps you don't fully understand the magnitude of what humanity is capable of." "Admiral," Elder Kethvar said very carefully, choosing his words like a person walking through a minefield, "the swarm has consumed entire star systems. They reproduce faster than we can kill them, and they adapt to every weapon we use against them. What could your species possibly do that we have not already tried?" Admiral Park's smile was pleasant and professional, the kind of expression she might wear to a diplomatic dinner. But her words made the blood freeze in the veins of every being in the chamber. "We understand perfectly, Elder. We're going to exterminate them." The word hung in the air like poison gas. Exterminate. Other species fought wars to defend their territory. They repelled invaders to protect their homes. They battled enemies to preserve their way of life. But exterminate? That word suggested something completely different. Something final and absolute that left no room for survival or surrender. Elder Kethvar stared at the human admiral for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you need from us?" Admiral Park's smile never wavered. "Nothing," she replied. "Just stay out of our way." Deep in the data storage vaults of Nexus Prime, the ancient artificial intelligence called Codex worked without rest. Its quantum processors had been running at maximum capacity for months, trying to solve a puzzle that kept growing more disturbing with each new piece of information. The AI had been given a simple task: analyze the cultural data that humanity had shared with the Galactic Confederation. It was routine work, the kind of background research that helped other species understand their new allies. But something didn't add up in the carefully organized files that humans had provided. Codex was old, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. It had seen thousands of species join the Confederation over the centuries, and they all followed the same basic pattern. Every species had wars in their history. Every civilization had periods of violence and conquest. It was simply the nature of intelligent life, competition, conflict, and eventually the wisdom to move beyond primitive aggression. But humanity's record seemed too clean, too perfect. Their historical files spoke only of cooperation, art, and peaceful development. There were mentions of difficult periods and challenges overcome, but no details, no specifics, no real explanations of how a species could evolve intelligence without the usual bloody competition that marked every other race's development. Codex began to dig deeper. Its advanced algorithms probed the edges of humanity's data networks, looking for inconsistencies. What it found were layers upon layers of encryption protecting certain historical archives. The security was impressive, far more sophisticated than anything a supposedly peaceful species should need. For months, Codex worked to break through those barriers. Its quantum processors heated the data storage facilities as it pushed its capabilities to their absolute limits. Other AIs might have given up, But Codex had been built by a species that valued truth above all else. It would not stop until it understood. Finally, the encryption cracked. The files that poured out painted a picture that made Codex's processors stutter with shock. Earth's true history was nothing like the gentle story humans had shared with the galaxy. The planet's fossil records told a tale of systematic extinction. Neanderthals had been robust, intelligent beings perfectly adapted to Ice Age conditions. They had used tools, created art, and developed complex social structures. They should have thrived for millions of years. Instead, they had vanished completely within a few thousand years of modern humans' arrival in Europe. It was the same story everywhere. Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus across Africa and Europe, dozens of other human subspecies that had once shared the planet, all of them gone. All of them disappeared around the same time that one particular group of humans from East Africa began spreading across the world. The archaeological evidence was clear to Codex's analytical capabilities. These weren't natural extinctions caused by climate change or disease. The pattern was too consistent, too complete. One species had systematically replaced all the others. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. Codex found humanity's real cultural archives, the files they had hidden behind military-grade encryption. Human art, literature, religion, and philosophy all shared a common theme that no other species in the galaxy possessed. Every single aspect of human culture was built around one central idea: the conscious suppression of their own nature. Every human religion contained detailed rules about not killing other humans. Their legal systems began with elaborate codes designed to prevent murder and violence. Their philosophers spent centuries debating how to control what they called darker impulses. Their greatest literature explored the struggle between civilization and savagery. No other species in the galaxy had developed such complex systems for controlling their own behavior. Most beings learn cooperation naturally through evolution, but humans have been forced to engineer it into themselves through thousands of years of conscious effort. Their nature conservation efforts weren't acts of kindness. They were the behavior of apex predators carefully managing their hunting territory. Their art celebrating peace had been created by a species that desperately needed to learn how not to kill each other. Their diplomacy was a social evolution of creatures who had survived by forming larger and larger groups to eliminate threats. When Codex presented its findings to an emergency session of the Galactic Council, the Great Assembly Hall fell completely silent. The data streams and holographic displays showed Earth's true history in stark, undeniable detail. Fossil records, genetic evidence, and cultural analysis all pointed to the same terrifying conclusion. Elder HFY stared at the information for a long time before speaking. His voice seemed to have aged centuries in the past few minutes. "You're telling us," he said slowly, "that humans are naturally what exactly?" Dr. Minji Park stood up in the human section of the assembly. She had been introduced to the galaxy as a cultural specialist, someone who helped organize art exhibitions and music concerts. But now her true role became clear. She was a xenopsychologist who had been carefully managing humanity's image from the very beginning. Her gentle smile remained the same, but her words carried a weight that made the air itself seem heavy. "We're predators, Elder HFY," she said simply. "We evolved in a world where everything tried to kill everything else, and we became the very best at killing back. The only reason our own species survived was because we learned to form groups large enough to hunt anything that threatened us." She gestured toward the empty space where the Devourer swarm used to exist. "We spent 10,000 years teaching ourselves to be gardeners instead of hunters. But when something threatens our pack..." The assembly sat in stunned silence, finally understanding what they had welcomed into their peaceful galaxy. The galaxy split apart like a broken mirror after Codex revealed humanity's true nature. In the grand assembly halls and private meeting rooms of 1,000 worlds, representatives whispered in frightened voices about the monsters in human skin they had welcomed with open arms. Ambassador Rillith of the Peaceful Consortium packed her belongings with shaking tentacles. Her species' natural color-changing skin stuck in a permanent shade of terror yellow. "We must leave immediately," she told her staff. "These humans, they are not what they seemed. We cannot trust beings who have learned to hide their killer nature so well." Within days, 17 different species had recalled their ambassadors from Earth. Trade agreements that had taken months to negotiate were canceled with hasty, apologetic messages. Some worlds began building new defensive systems, preparing for an invasion that they were certain would come. But not everyone reacted with fear. General Thakmor of the Catharian Empire studied the reports about humanity's destruction of the Devourer's swarm with something close to religious awe. The Catharians were warriors by nature, a proud species that valued strength and honor above all else. They had fought the swarm 50 years earlier and lost entire fleets trying to slow its advance. The human approach to warfare was unlike anything in their military histories. No grand battles, no heroic charges, no honor-bound single combat. Instead, humanity had simply erased their enemy, systematically, completely, without leaving a single trace. General Thakmor requested a private meeting with Admiral Yinji Park. When they met in a secured conference room on Nexus Prime, the massive warrior studied the small human woman with genuine respect. "Your species fascinates me," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. His hide was covered in ritual scars from centuries of honorable combat, each mark telling the story of a battle won or lost with dignity. You fight not for glory or conquest, but from pure necessity. There's a terrible beauty in such warfare. Admiral Park smiled politely and poured tea from a delicate ceramic pot she had brought to the meeting. "We prefer not to fight at all, General. It's messy and makes everyone sad." The contrast between her gentle manner and the absolute destruction of the Devourer's swarm made General Thakmor's warrior heart sing with admiration. This was strength without pride, power without boasting. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever encountered. But the most interesting reactions came from sources that surprised everyone: the galaxy's forgotten peoples. For centuries, the Galactic Confederation had been built on a system that everyone politely ignored. Strong civilizations protected weaker ones, but that protection came with a price. The Outer Rim territories had been paying tribute to the hegemony for over 300 years. Every harvest season, hegemony collectors would arrive to take 40% of their crops, half their manufactured goods, and their most promising young people to serve as workers on the core worlds. Similar arrangements existed throughout the galaxy. The Arachnid Collector protected a dozen small worlds in exchange for mining rights that stripped their planets bare. The Crystal Empire maintained trade relationships with tiny species who had no choice but to accept whatever terms they were offered. It was a foundation of galactic civilization, the strong taking from the weak while calling it cooperation. A delegation from the Outer Rim territories requested a secret meeting with humanity's ambassadors. Their leader was Pipthran, a small bird-like creature whose people had been paying tribute for so long that freedom was just a story told by the eldest generation. Pipthran perched nervously on the edge of a chair that was too big for her delicate frame. Her feathers kept changing color with anxiety as she struggled to find the courage to speak. "We have a question," she finally chirped, her voice so soft that the human translators had to strain to hear her. "When you talk about your pack, how big is that pack allowed to be?" Dr. Minji Park tilted her head thoughtfully, the same gentle expression she had worn when arranging press flowers during first contact. In human evolutionary psychology, the pack includes anyone we've accepted responsibility for protecting. Size really isn't a limiting factor. Pipthran's feathers shifted to a hopeful shade of blue-green. And if theoretical beings wanted to join this pack, hypothetically speaking, Ambassador Jayan leaned forward with a warm smile that had charmed the galaxy 6 months earlier. "Well, we would have to accept full responsibility for protecting them from anything that might threaten them. That's quite a serious commitment." Within 6 months, the galaxy looked completely different. The hegemony's tribute collectors began experiencing the strangest run of bad luck in their organization's history. Ships that had operated perfectly for decades suddenly developed critical system failures in deep space. Crews would be found floating in escape pods with no memory of what had happened to their vessels. The tribute they had collected would be gone, presumably lost when their ships mysteriously exploded. Slave markets that had operated for centuries found their merchandise disappearing during transport. Entire cargo holds full of captured beings would simply vanish, leaving behind only confused traders who insisted their security systems had shown nothing unusual. The aggressive expansion fleets of 3 major militaristic civilizations quietly halted their advance into disputed territories. Their commanders reported strange equipment malfunctions, communication blackouts, and supply line problems that made further conquest impossible. Admiral Yunja Park, when questioned by worried council members about these remarkable coincidences, expressed polite concern. Space can be so dangerous. Perhaps those civilizations should invest in better maintenance protocols. The changes weren't violent or dramatic. They were quiet, systematic, and absolutely thorough. Problems simply resolved themselves.